Good afternoon. My name is Bahman Yazdanfar, and this is Turnaround, a weekly show brought to you by my colleague John Hardy and I to discuss different parts of the different aspects of the human elements when it comes to interaction with each other, whether it's a small community or organization or a workplace or even a small family. During last 3-4 weeks, we put our focus on the issue of the using mindfulness, and then we followed with the habits that we have. We are creature of the habits. Then we continue with our discussion using our 5 senses to its full capacity in to understand ourselves as well as others. And last 2 weeks we continued about with the issues of the crowd mentality, crowd thinking, as well as lying that is become norm for the crowd thinking. Now this week we are going to a little bit again go deeper to this discussion by focusing on the part of the personal friendship and how this crowd mentality and lying play along, and how good or bad, how helpful or damaging that could be. John?
Yes, Bowman.
You remember that, or are you completely out of your surroundings right now in Zen mode?
Yeah,
I know you were doing some Tai Chi this afternoon.
Exactly, and now I'm descending from those heights.
So it is that intense. No wonder not too many people go for Tai Chi.
That's probably one of the reasons.
Landing.
There should be a warning with it. It's what happens afterwards that's so terrible.
Landing apparently is a very lengthy process.
Oh, it can be. It's a lifetime for some of us, and even extending it to the next.
So you were talking about the other night about the friendship and how this issue of the friendship, in the sense of the being a friend just for sake of friend, not offending each other in order to keep the friendship, or be truthful and become villain in that relationship.
Well, I mean, what reminds me of it, this term mutual admiration society, right? I remember there was a lady who I knew actually used the term mutual admiration society in describing a group that she belonged to as a positive, right? I mean, originally that term was a pejorative. It was basically making fun of the fact that certain individuals get together and it's really about just a bunch of egos, one supporting the other.
Okay.
And now this has become so pervasive that when people hear mutual admiration society, they don't even find irony in it. They see this as actually a valid basis for a group to exist.
And
right?
this mutual admiration is based on the facts or based on the fiction?
Usually fiction.
Okay. So we want to clarify that it's not a real compliment given based on the actual...
Because, I mean, the people who actually are admirable, you know, I mean, perhaps all of us are worthy of admiration on some level, but the ones who we generally think of as admirable, I think have much less of a need to be admired. They don't need to compensate. The idea that we should be together with people who completely approve of us in every respect, I think really is a reflection of a compensation for the fact that we're really not that happy about ourselves, that underneath we realize that we are falling short, but we're running away from this, and the last thing we want to be for others to do is remind us of it. And so that we look for companionship in order to help us run away from who we are.
Are you suggesting ignorance is a bliss?
I'm not the first to suggest it, and I won't be the last. I think that truer words have never been said. I mean, knowledge, I mean, it's very, you know, how many of us, if we're really honest, are in relationships where the other has permission to be truly honest with us?
I have, but that is why I don't have many friends, or at least I.
So you're basically
that is the symbol.
You prove the point. You know, as a hermit, as a self-professed hermit, you're literally making the point.
But it never ceases to amaze me that that people knowingly prefer to be lied than being directed, if they ask for it, for a right direction, or being suggested or given some sort of the constructive advice to the right direction.
Well, exactly. Even when people ask for it. So what happens is that, let's just say, if we look at the game of life, right, and that people strategically wish to have friends, because not having friends can be problematic, and it's just not an easy way to live your life. So you wish to have friends. And if you know that the vast majority of people, even if they ask for your opinion, in terms of an honest opinion, they really don't want it. They actually really wish to have this positive mirror regardless. And what it reminds me of, in a way, is my little girl, when she would pick out 2 outfits. And every morning she had 2 outfits that she picked out. And the thing was, she would ask me which one that I liked. And, good luck to me if I chose the wrong one. Because if I chose the one that she didn't like, she would just look at me irritated, like, Daddy, you don't know anything. And then I said, or there's the other one, and then she would accept it that I was supporting her view. Okay. So basically what she was looking for at the age of 2 or 3 years old, and it didn't change afterwards, was me to just reaffirm her decision, right? So if I was smart, what I would try to do is figure out, at least in advance, which way she was leaning, and then think about it for a while, and then come down hard on that side, right? Well, not even hard, because I couldn't be sure, but tentatively give that one. And if I got a little bit of support, that's the way I would go. And I think ultimately this is, this is in a child, but really this is exactly what plays out. And that's why people's behavior in the end also becomes actually reified by their friendships, by the groups that they're in, is that this mutual admiration reinforces whatever their pathology is. In fact, I was thinking, R.D. Laing, the psychiatrist, talked about the idea of complementary relationships and really complementary pathologies. So that one kind of, so in other words, let's just say if a woman happens to be an overprotective mother, then she needs to have the child that would be the dependent child. Because if that child's not being dependent, then she's going to have a hard time actually playing out her pathology. And so that one matches the other, and one, sort of reinforces the other and draws the other. And once they find each other, they become these reciprocal sides, and they create a kind of false stasis.
Bidirectional.
Yeah, so that in a way that the two of them can, because even with your own pathology, whatever your skew is, you're in a state of imbalance. So interestingly enough, it's only in finding a relationship that's complementary in the sense that R.D. Laing uses, that you can actually find that mechanism which helps you to hold it in place.
How you deal with the internal conflict?
Actually, you don't. What ends up happening is you distract yourself. You don't spend time alone.
Why? If I'm sitting with you and I want to be part of that relationship, like a complementary kind of the relationship, and I say, oh, I like the way that you are thinking, but internally I say, he's full of crap. The internal conflict still is there. You have to, as a person that opened my mouth and say something else, has to deal with that.
Okay, so what I would say is probably happens is that group then will direct it at some third party or some other group.
Why, you mean the friendship with arbitration?
Well, no, but let's just say in the sense that, let's just say that we have the Mutual Admiration Society, we're complementing each other in terms of being whatever, great philosophers, or whatever we choose to be. So then what happens is whatever tension we're experiencing, if we believe that the other one is not as great a philosopher, one as they think they are, or two as each of us is in turn, then
delusional.
Yes, it's clearly delusional, and we basically feel that we're feeding into it, it's creating a tension. That tension then is displaced somewhere into the outside world. So what then happens is it strengthens the bond in that this group now becomes separate and distinct from the rest of the world. And
you mean the group that doesn't complement each other?
Well, or not. They're not complementing this group. They might be other self, sort of reinforcing bubbles, mutual admiration societies. So then what you have is the Mutual Admiration Society over there. As far as we're concerned, we can project all our anger and angst towards that group. That's a problem.
Well, what I'm saying is even with the two groups, you see, It's very interesting that you brought up this issue of the mutual admiration, especially between mother and child.
Well, I mean, that's just a complementary relationship. I wasn't thinking of mutual
but what I'm saying,
admiration
that was even deeper than that. It is a more emotional, nurturing, and all of that is involved.
Can be, yeah.
Or at least most people wants to believe this is.
Yeah.
But let me put it. Let me give you an example. You and I, we meet somewhere. Let's say we met 6-7 months ago. I'm just using that as an example. Please, viewers, don't get it as a actual fact. You and I met, and therefore we decided to be a friend with each other.
Yeah.
So at that time,
Nothing could be farther from
okay,
the case.
that was, let's say, there was some point of the either common interest, attraction, some sort of the mutual the view about something.
Like a shared view. Right.
Whatever it was that. So we get together and we become friends, and a month later,
Yeah.
You find some of my, let's say, habits are annoying, which I'm pretty sure it is not far from fetch. It is very your eyes.
I'm just trying to imagine
your
what that
eyes
could
went
be.
to your feelings direction, so I think that you are like connecting the feeling. So I'm touching it the right spot.
And then stayed there for a while.
Yeah. So let's say
Okay.
let's say to get that. Now, usually in the based on the common admiration society,
Yes.
we try to preserve this friendship. We commonly method used is we try to change each other.
No.
No, I'm not talking about the us. I'm talking about commonly in the society.
To change the other?
We try to suggest that certain habit of yours, let's say, is annoying, or
I would say no. No. That is the opposite of what will happen, because the moment that even that level of sincerity would enter into such a relationship of mutual admiration.
Oh, I'm not talking about the physically doing that. I'm talking about thinking.
Oh, in terms of
No.
So you're talking about the internal.
No. Yes, it is internal.
So internally,
internal
one is
dialogue.
thinking that, okay, let's just say the other person has a habit, let's just say the habit of, is whatever, let's just say scratching their head
Yes,
like this.
whatever it is, and you say, I really don't like him or her to do that.
Right.
You're not telling me. You're still.
It's just internal.
It is wonderful friendship. But internally you say, well, I wish that person
Right.
would get rid of this nasty habit.
Yes.
Okay. That is the part that my argument comes, that how we can overcome that. If we focus on ourselves, that why that habit bothers me, and our choice as an individual entity, then I have two choices. Either I have to stick with his habit because his other attributes are acceptable and favorable, or this habit is so nasty to me that I prefer even to lose the other attributes, because so therefore I decide to discontinue my friendship. My dialogue from my perspective is, the honest dialogue is, you as an individual should deal with your own demons, rather than try to give any suggestion when it comes to the communication.
Okay, true.
Yeah.
But let's just say the example, instead of being like a particular behavior, which let's just say is a twitch or whatever.
Oh, no, I just use that.
No,
as
no.
a
But what I'm just
behavior.
saying is a behavior which is just focused on the individual themselves. What happens though when it's a behavior of how they behave towards you? So for instance, let's just say that like an example could be that I mean, certainly this has been levied against me with good reason, is that I have a tendency to jump in and not let the other person finish a sentence, right?
That is good example.
Okay,
That is very
so
good example.
This is a typical kind of thing that can come up. Now,
Yeah.
so what then is, this is going on all the time. The person just naturally
course.
does it, right? So now what then happens is internally, because this is not just their problem, the other person's problem. So if I'm not letting you finish a sentence, right, and I'm doing this all the time, you're experiencing this. Now, to some extent, you could say, you're experiencing this, and why is this bothering you so much? And you could examine that maybe this relates to an experience in your childhood, whatever. Okay, on some level. But on another level, it's just not that pleasant. to have somebody not allow you to finish your sentences, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so going back to your example,
Okay.
what would you say is the way to engage with, let's say, that situation?
Actually, that was
Yeah.
more of my example than twitching. I was,
No, that would
I
be
was,
better.
yes,
Okay,
I
yeah.
was toward this because twitching it doesn't bother. It just bothers me maybe
It's just an external thing.
visually. But what I'm talking about something that impacts you.
Precisely.
It could be thinking on your behalf, making decision on your behalf.
For
Maybe
instance.
going to buy a cup of coffee and decide what type of the coffee you want without asking, whatever.
Even worse, exactly.
No. What I'm saying is, the principle is choices are two. Actually,
right.
three. Actually, either I decide whether or not I want to tolerate this behavior or ignore it because there are other attributes there that I am looking in this person, or I want to bring it up to you and say, hey, listen, this behavior of yours is very annoying and I don't appreciate that.
Right.
Okay? Or say, hey, hell with it, I don't want this behavior, I just tell the guy goodbye, or girl, whatever.
Right.
Okay, these are three choices. Now, society in general tries to bring this mix in collectively, not individually, collectively, bring these three and say, okay, I like to keep this part, but I don't like this part. And I don't want to tell him or her that I see what you're doing wrong. Therefore, I am going to devise a method to see if I can get him or her to get rid of this habit, which happens in marriages constantly.
Perhaps, yeah.
So when we are talking about, we are losing the honesty of individual thinking, the authenticity of the individual thinking, in order to keep the communication polite, acceptable, and then things when goes beyond wrong, then hell goes loose, or all of the heavy altercation comes along. That part I have a problem personally in that aspect. That is why you have seen me when it comes to the discussion, usually I am very blunt. Because I believe if there is any conflict, that's better resolved in that moment rather than...
Yeah, no, I think that's true. And I'm just thinking about something else. And I'm thinking in a way that when we're talking about mutual admiration, we're talking about something more. It's more like, it's not just even accepting another's behavior. It's somehow adulation, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's that you're getting this, whatever you do, it's great. You don't get an honest feedback. You don't get an honest mirror. Everything is great. Everything is wonderful. And so the moment that you do give anything less than absolute adulation in such a relationship,
It becomes such a great criticism.
it's a criticism, it's
Yeah.
an insult, what's wrong, right? So now there becomes this continuous pressure to feed the other one's ego. And so then it becomes this, I think, like a contract. I'll feed your ego if you feed mine, right?
So it is just a business transaction, emotionally, mentally, intellectually.
Right. And what happens then is, as each his ego expands, right? Because this kind of attention, I mean, once it's accepted, if it's taken on, then what happens now is that person's ego becomes larger, the narcissism becomes greater, and when the narcissism becomes greater, now you become more and more desperate for. It's like it's addiction.
Which comes back to the
because you
discussion we did, another form of addiction.
It is actually addiction, because what happens now is you need more of it. It's not that you become sated, oh, I got enough praise. No, the next day you need more praise.
Mm-hmm.
I got that much yesterday, now I need more and more and more. And then you need more praise from more people, and you need it more continuously. And this thing then creates a dependency. It weakens the individual. So as they experience themselves as getting stronger, underneath they're actually becoming weaker and more dependent. And so they're clinging more and more to this experience. And I was thinking that collectively, this in a way is how the kind of troopers, actually not just the troopers, certainly the players, maybe
the players even more.
probably the players more than anybody,
Yeah.
actually collectively over time become worse. They become weaker and weaker and more dependent.
That is why they usually, when they get many of them, when they get to that level, they start to cannibalize their troopers, which they support them in that aspect to some level. I give you a good example. When I came to Canada about 30 years ago, so I started to study English and learn
Yep.
the culture and so on, so like everybody else, anyhow. I remember in the 90s, I asked everybody that I knew who were local, I mean born here, correct my English. And everybody said, oh, your English is very good. Excellent, don't worry, you are great. It took me 20 years to find a couple people when I got involved with the politics, and they had to, I really forced them. And they really realized that I am sincere to start to correct me. So for 20 years, my English language or my English literature was being declined, and everybody in the society hey, you're very good in English.
Well, this is what happens to children at school. For instance, they're not allowed to fail, so we just keep pushing them forward until finally they're 18 years old and completely in a position
And
of,
after 30 years, still I am handicapped in English, especially in grammar and some of the spelling and some vocabulary, of course.
well, because it becomes, I mean, at the risk of actually throwing bouquets, no, I have no issues with your English.
No, what I'm saying...
But the thing about it is, couldn't we always speak better? Exactly.
Of
Everybody
course.
can actually speak
And what
better.
I'm
yeah.
trying to say is, when you look at it is just a simple example in one individual,
Yeah.
and then you look at the whole collective society, and this kind of the thing goes on in your job performances, in your skills, in your ability, in your profession. Hey, you are a good doctor. You keep prescribing wrong medicine, and after 20 years, and then someone dies. And so what's happened? He's incompetent. I'm just being exaggerating. I'm just.
But it's an interesting thing about this incompetence and competence, right? Like.
No, I mean they justify the action. They don't go back and say for 20 years we give the false admiration to the guy.
Well, so if you take a look at exactly, and I think what happens then is you expand this across the whole society collectively, day in, day out. What starts to happen is that people become weaker and weaker, right? They don't deliver. So I was thinking to myself, I would say that if you were to ask most people the simple question, do you experience the majority of people in your world as following through on what they say they're going to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you were, and I don't think this is much of a stretch to say that, let's just say if this was 50 years ago, the majority of people would have said yes to this question, and now the answer would be an overwhelming no, that they experience people basically by and large as not doing what they say they will, right?
Yeah.
Now, the thing with that is that each one of those individuals who is saying this is, of course, by implication,
part of the problem.
well, one is part of the, but also two, believing themselves to be different than the rest. They're believing themselves to be an exception to that rule. But the thing about it is, given the fact that each one is overwhelmingly experiencing this, it means that the overwhelming majority of these people who are experiencing themselves to be an exception are deluding themselves, right?
Or either that or putting up with it.
Well, no, but we're not talking about whether they're putting up with it. But what I'm saying is that they've got a complete misperception of themselves, right?
Okay, yes.
So they're experiencing it outside, they don't experience it on themselves. So what's taking place is that this bubble, this admiration bubble, now, they take it on as themselves. And now their ability to actually see themselves to any degree is so limited that how could they possibly change their behavior? If you actually believe you're that bubble that everybody else sees, then now you're really lost. Because now there's just no way you can change your behavior because you've got a complete false perception. And so I think that's one of the problems, is so that everybody then has this false, not everybody, the vast majority has this false perception. And then when you get into the problem is, okay, let's just say you're the one person who delivers. You're the 1 out of 10 who delivers, and the other 9 are not delivering. Well, that becomes the sucker's play. Because if you're delivering and they're not, then sooner or later that's not going to keep up. So finally, you stop delivering too. So even the ones who were delivering will finally say, why
Give
am I
up,
delivering?
yes, give up and say, well, why should I do that all the work, the heavy work?
And I think that goes a long way to explaining this phenomenon of how the whole, and what happens then though is that when you're not delivering, whether you're doing it a delusion or not, what disappears is your own self-respect. Because I was thinking to myself, when people basically, if most people are not delivering when they say they're going to do something, right? So then the few times they're doing it, my guess is that what's making them do it is not an inner sense of an obligation to do it because they said they would.
Because of incentive or something.
Exactly. It's fear of reprisal or some reward if they do. So that then means
Conditioning.
the conditioning.
Yeah.
But also too, it means that it's an external, and that internally they don't feel any obligation to make good on their own word, which then means that there's no self-respect.
Which bring us back to if you remember originally a few sessions back, where you asked me about the level of respect. I was distinguishing between your model and my model. I said I respect people the amount of the respect they have for themselves.
Exactly. And so as we go back to that point, then we see that the overwhelming majority of people, even though they perceive themselves to have respect for themselves, actually have none.
No, that is the falsification of the respect based on the definition of the society. If you remember in our first or second session of this series, I'm talking about 5 months ago, we discussed about if a politician become they get this title of honorable or something like that. The day before they were delivering flyer, and next day they become honorable.
Right. Yes.
And then when they lose that, the next day they don't know what to do. So it comes back to the external factor for the respect or confidence, for that matter. Because if you don't have that, if your confidence is external, when you remove the variable, you lost that.
In fact, that's when you end up finding out if, in fact, there was genuine confidence there in the first place, right?
Yeah, because it's very seldom you find the kind of.
Because it's when it's removed. It's when it's the tough choice. Because I was thinking that, like the majority of people, for instance, we talk about the spiritual path, and this is what we talked about too, is that anybody who is on any kind of true path, regardless of where they started, they landed in life at the top or the bottom, confronted with this in a world where this is pervasive, it by and large is going to place them in a position where it's almost infinitely likely that they're going to end up alone or largely alone.
Yeah.
As a complete outsider, because any group that they encounter, and certainly any group that I've ever experienced, has ultimately been a kind of mutual admiration society, where it was not about authenticity. There was always a stated goal, but the stated goal essentially was there as lip service. What was really lying underneath is that we basically will essentially have this lie. Instead of Plato's noble lie, it's an ignoble lie. It's a lie that we'll all buy into. Why? Because we're afraid of being alone. Because we're afraid of standing out. Because we're afraid of the unknown, of what it would be like to be outside of this, right? And so in a way then it's collective cowardice which holds the group together, which is a disaster.
We discussed last week about that. And that's a good segue because when you were talking about the cowardness, Cowardness, as you said, last week you alluded on that is not that reacting in a certain situation is when you try to justify it with another lie.
And deny it.
Deny it, and by using another lie, of course.
Exactly.
And when you are talking about this self-admiration kind of the society, that means, okay, I prefer to have 10 phony friends than be genuine and be alone.
Absolutely. In fact, I would actually say that's the basic choice that people are making without knowing that they're making it.
So we go back to one of the sayings, I assume it was Victor Hugo again, or his cousin, as you alluded one time, that the reason we have all of these issues over thousands of years among human beings, either in the political, social, or economical level, is because people cannot stand themselves then.
Ultimately, yeah. Ultimately, yeah.
Now that we talk about lie, I want to ask you something. Why we start with one lie? When we start with one lie, when do we start the first lie? Is it when we are a child? Yes, John. I just want to know, talking about lies and talking about self-lies mostly.
Just really the ones that matter,
And when you mentioned earlier that your daughter, when she was very young, 2, 3, 4 years old, bringing a couple of the outfit and asking you about the choice, and you were in the position to not to hurt her feeling. You had to really start to a form of the lie.
Oh yeah, I mean on some level.
Now,
yeah.
I want to reverse the situation. When the girl or boy, when we are child, because when we are born, we don't have this genetic of lying. We have to learn it.
I'm not sure, but anyways, go on.
I mean, I haven't seen any study to say, okay, a child, when he comes out of the womb of his or her mother, is part of his or her gene is lying. It has to be something adoptive. Something has to be learned.
You know that animals lie, monkeys lie.
Monkeys lie?
Absolutely.
I didn't know they speak, first of all, let alone they lie.
And if they could, they would lie like troopers.
Can you give us a little bit of the... can you illuminate us?
Well,
I am
like what
ignorant.
I mean is lie in the sense of deceit. Like, for instance, I remember they were studying baboons, and there's adultery. Or there's theft among chimpanzees. We're not the only ones out there who are capable of levels of deceit or theft, or even the ability to deceive another, right? In hunting, to give the animal a false impression that we're going to go here and then we go there.
But that is different than lying.
No, but what I'm saying is the capacity to misdirect, right?
Okay.
The moment that we can misdirect means now we have the capacity to lie, right?
But with the lie, you have to construct something. With the misdirection, you behave and hoping the perception of the other party reacts differently.
Well, but ultimately the lie is the same. Really, every lie is a misdirection. It's like, I'm telling you this, but in the expectation that you're going to believe what I'm telling you, right? Because if you tell somebody something that is patently false, but it's so ridiculous, right? If you say something to somebody that it's completely absurd, let's say when I say to my children, that I'm a fantastic famous singer, which they know is perfectly false. There's no lie in that because it's so laughable and ridiculous that they know that wouldn't be fooled. So therefore, even though it's not true, it's not a lie. Lying has to do with deceit. So now, actually, let's get into lying. What is lying? So we can get into the lie of commission, right? The simple, straightforward lie, which is, that I say something that I can say, this is a cube, right? And so it's not a cube, we know it isn't, right? But then there's the lie of omission. Is I'm describing everything that's what's on the table, and let's just say there's that pen. I'm describing everything, and I'm leaving the pen out.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm inferring that there's completeness in what I'm describing, or let's say I'm saying, well, all the things that were on the table were this, and I leave out the pen, and the pen is significant, right?
Okay.
Lie of omission.
Okay.
Then we have the lie of inference. Is I'm talking about something a certain way, and I happen to know that if I'm saying it this way,
it could.
You're going to interpret a certain way. It's hard for me to think of an example of that. What? Now, that becomes a much more sophisticated lie, and the good liars are going to use that. They're going to use those kinds of lies, the inference, the implication, right?
Okay.
Now, that kind of lying, that misdirection, I mean, I'm just thinking children adopt it so quickly because they realize that strategically, if I want to get this and I say that, then I'll be able to get this by saying that. And ultimately, they're feeding their own desire for pleasure. So they don't see it as wrong.
No. That is the part that
they have to be taught that it's wrong in actual
No,
fact.
I understand that. What I'm saying is I have a little bit difficulty in differentiation between lie and deceitful action. And the reason for that is, with the lie, you need another element, and that element is element of trust. Because if I am to, for instance, in that scenario that you said, she cannot do that with a stranger, she's doing it with the daddy and mommy, or brother and sister. There is a certain history or certain kind of the relation, predisposition or predisposed relationship there, so they can take advantage of.
Doesn't have to be.
But if I go out on the street and someone asks me, how old are you? And I say, I'm 40, instead of saying 58. That is a straight lie, and it's different. It doesn't matter even if I have any intention of deceit involved. Because a lot of people lie without any intention. They just lie.
Okay, but there's usually a benefit. When you tell a lie, in other words, you're not going to say you're 58 when you're 40. It usually goes the other way.
Earlier we alluded, either it is we want to avoid something or we want to gain something. I understand that.
Right.
What I'm saying is, if I lie to a stranger something strange completely, I call it lie. But if I am trying to take advantage of you, either by misdirection or misbehavior or change of a certain tonality on my voice, that is, I am using the relationship as a leverage to apply that lie without even using the lie.
Okay, so yeah, there's two aspects, I guess, to it. I mean, now
so what my
but now we're talking about the whole field of manipulation.
Well, yes, that is a completely different whole ballgame.
And lying is misdirection is part of manipulation.
Yes. But what I'm saying is just the act of the lie. I mean, if the child come and cry to get something, she is using the relationship to get you to convince to do something, like a sales. As I said, it's part of the human being.
So a lie has to have an objective.
But what I'm saying is the act of we, as a human being, know that this pen is on this table, and tell you there is no pen on this table, knowingly. When it starts, how do we get it?
I would say it's like you go back to the Garden of Eden, right? First lie.
So you believe it is part of our gene then?
Well, I'm just thinking about this, because I think that's an important question. I've often thought about this, that when did we fall from grace, right?
Mm-hmm.
That typically when we're taught that story, the first time we're taught that we fell from grace when we bit the apple, right?
Okay.
Whereas later on, as I came to think of it, and particularly also having had children, I came to realize it's just like if you have, your little children and you actually put them in a room and you say, you can do anything you want, just don't do that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely certain they will do that, right? Now,
of course.
But the thing that will happen is after they've done it, and then you ask them, what will they do, right? As a parent, because they've done it, if you're normal, and you're not, crazy about control, the fact that they did it won't bother you so much. But when they deny it, that's when you'll experience anger, right?
Yes.
And I was thinking that that's when we fell from grace, not when we bit the apple. We would have been forgiven. And I guess what it is, it's courage. It's a lack of courage. That is exactly what I wanted. Why did we not admit, why do we not admit at the time that we ate the apple? Why? Because we were afraid. And it's funnily enough, what were we afraid of? Because in the end, we knew that God loved us. So did we think that God, and I'm thinking this is a metaphor of the child in prayer, right? Did we think that God was going to,
or the father is going to
it's almost like, it's funny, like what is it?
Do we lie because of fear?
I'm just wondering whether it's fear or vanity. That's what I'm wondering.
That is the part that I want to distinguish.
Exactly. It's an interesting one. I'm not sure.
I believe the way that I have experienced life based on other people that I confronted, including myself, of course. When I was younger, I was doing all of
before
this.
You became an island.
No, before becoming an island, of course. Lie usually. I realize that with lie, either you want, either you are not confident of what you're projecting,
right,
or you are guilty of something. You don't want other people to know of what guilt you are guilty of, or what crime you're guilty of in your mind. But when it become habit, I think that time become vanity, but at the beginning is always a fear.
Interesting. It's because we have
vanity, because a thief or a career politician doesn't lie become part of his craft.
No, let's say going back to the apple, right? When we bit the apple, we came into awareness of ourselves, right? That's the significance.
We come from based on what I have heard.
Now we know we exist, right? Well, the moment that we have some sense of our separateness from the world, we have an ego, right?
Okay.
That was the birth of the ego. And what was the first act of the ego? Was the lie. Exactly. Yes. So it was actually the moment that we bit the thing that it was then inevitable that we were going to lie.
Yeah. And that lie first started.
So then that then is the answer. I was thinking it is coming into the very essence of experiencing ourselves as a separate being. When the child begins to realize that it is a separate being,
then
that's the first lie.
Gives that right to himself or herself to lie and provide something because it gives an identity, different identity probably to him or her, or it is I believe the children usually lie at the beginning based on the fear, and that fear is based on the projection of the parents over them, because they don't want to hurt them, they don't want to lose the love, they don't want to lose the trust,
to disappoint,
they don't want to lose all of those emotional attachment they have, and they start. But later on, when they continue, that become a byproduct, result of vanity.
You know, it's interesting you said that, like, about that whole thing about, because sometimes a lie can be somewhat noble, in that. I remember with my grandfather, my grandfather just adored me. And it was true unconditional love I received from my grandfather. And so there might be a situation whereby if I were to tell him the truth about something, it would have disappointed him, would have hurt him, there would have been no reprisal. But I actually was feeling, in a way, badly for him as well, that if I were to tell him the truth. So it can actually have a noble aspect, where it's not just selfish, it's actually caring for the one who cares about you.
Based on your perception, of course. It could be your perception is subjective, because probably you don't have enough experience of your grandfather had.
Actually, no, I don't think so. Like, what I mean is, I think that a child innately has a sense of when they're unconditionally loved or not. That's something.
No, I am talking about it from perspective of thinking of your truth could hurt someone else.
No, precisely. You don't know if it will. But the thing is that because you feel this sense of obligation, right? So in a weird way, this sense of obligation is something noble, the fact that you actually feel it, and therefore this then creates a kind of a weight that I feel an obligation to uphold a certain standard, not just for myself, but for that person too. So it's very interesting, this. Yeah, exactly, because there's so many nuances to it. For the total narcissist, they just lie to just gain benefit, and there's nothing more to it, really, as far as I can see. It's really simple, their lies.
And
For the rest of us, I think there's a degrees of both.
Yeah, but the issue is the reason I brought this issue of the lies during last week and this week up more. I emphasized more is because these lies, when we were talking about group mentality and group thinking, when this lies goes to a group, then there is either it's vanity or the manipulation or whatever the reason, depending on the situation. One or two or three individuals get that opportunity to use lies and start to become self-appointed representative of the rest.
Oh,
you see,
that's a good one too.
Because, for instance, our politician comes and say, "Oh, Canadians are talking about that," or Ontarians saying that, or Torontonians saying that. We thought even there is no consensus, there is no documentation.
Oh, I'll give you another example. I used to be a builder, and as a builder, you're dealing with the neighbors and things like that. And I remember there was one particular person who here I was building a house in a neighborhood. And this person just presented themselves and said, well, the neighbors are saying this, right? Now, the neighbors had no interest whatsoever in what was going on. He certainly did. And he was presenting himself as the voice of the neighborhood,
yes.
right?
That is why it's self-appointed representative.
And the thing is, and if the neighbors were saying anything, it was only because he was whispering in their ears, right? And the thing is this self-appointed representative. I was thinking this is a very interesting phenomenon because more than in the democratic system, it seems that becomes not the virtuous leader, but the natural leader. It's the typical leader is exactly this busybody, this horse's ass who basically somehow appoints himself to be, and somehow or other, it's almost like he does it enough that everybody almost out of sheer apathy just lets it be, and then eventually the fellow actually gets real power.
Or even follow it.
Because eventually he gets elected, whatever. Now he ends up getting the status that he pretended to have.
Which is based, that was based on the just simple lie and repetition of the lie, of course.
And this is the other thing about lying: it's repetition. It's the relentless repetition of anything, which even if you know it's false, if someone just keeps saying it, somehow it's almost like in your peripheral, and I think maybe on the subconscious level, it sort of goes in and it just hammers, sort of like water against the foundation. And if it's happens,
it's just hitting till the wall of the resistance is being completely removed.
And when you take a look at the kind of person who is capable of this level of repetition, right? It's an idiot. It's not anybody with intellect has a really hard time, even if they wanted to repeat on that level of just constantly basically like a parrot, they just wouldn't be able to pull it off. You have to be actually quite stupid to pull it off. So interestingly enough, it is the stupidest among us who end up becoming the most persuasive of the crowd a lot of the time. It's a kind of a contra-selection, a complete upside-down phenomenon. But I've seen it so many times.
A couple of years ago, during one of my campaigns when I was running as an independent, I spent a few days just looking at the old tapes of the politicians in the United States and Canada on YouTube, just randomly. Interestingly enough, if the videos that I saw from 1940s or 1930s or 1960s or 70s, 80s, 90s to this day, the same transcript, a little bit slightly different, but the same thing. We provide job, we don't have job. First they say what is the problem and how I am going to fix it, and then they come, and then the next administration comes, the same thing, and the same thing. And I was thinking, okay, I understand those people who claim all of these actions and this leadership, but what about people? What is the memory span of the public when it comes to this kind of the speech? I mean, we have TV for the last 70, 80 years, at least. We have radio for the last 100 years or so. And people listening, and they are using which goes back to our session a couple of weeks ago. They don't use their senses completely or totally. Because if you use your senses, there must be a memory of 4 years ago the same speech was given.
No, but I guess what it is the immediacy effect. Is that when something is much more immediate, it blocks it out and sort of pushes the other ones into the back.
No,
and I think it also,
I'm talking about registering the lies. I'm not talking about the hope and admiration of the person. But if a lie is being repeated 2 or 3 times, and you know it is a lie, why it's not registered in our head for the following, let's say, election or following election, or
I think it's also because we're not nearly as cognitive as we think we are. Is that the unconscious part of our minds ends up being the real driver, and so these kinds of these processes which are very primitive and basic end up dominating us, such that our reason is only connected very, very infrequently and for short spans of time, and then for, let's just say, a particular moment, particular decision, and then basically it's parked, and it's just
so it's like a disposable kind of the
disposable reasoning. Yeah, exactly. I'll bring out the logic for this transaction, and then boom, it's gone, and then I'm on to the next. And if you take a look at even the way we perceive life right now, it's completely episodically.
I am hungry, I get a sandwich, I gone, they finish. If tomorrow I ask you what did you eat, you don't remember?
I don't even, and that is true. Like, I don't even remember what I did 3-4 hours ago. Now, particularly if I have a busy day and I have several conversations, if I'm in this conversation, I don't remember what happened in the conversation before the previous one. 2 ones ago, I mean, I have to sort of kind of remind myself, and then it triggers it. But otherwise, I'm basically just sort of switching channels, and I'm in this channel. But it's somehow in this disjointed state. Yeah. I mean, I think what I'm experiencing is not much different than everybody else, and I think that as a result of that, there's this kind of perpetual imbalance.
You see, that is very interesting, because even though we are creature, we human being, as you describe, we are constantly jumping from one thing as a disposable reasoning or disposable thinking or even disposable experiencing.
Yes.
But as soon as we come across an issue that it become legal issue, let's say we go to court or something, all of these failures, all of these flaws of the human being works against us.
No, absolutely, because now we're under the spotlight, and that's where the lawyer is in a special position.
If you didn't remember that, why you didn't remember that? If you say something else because your subconscious just project itself, you're a liar,
the whole thing about the whole situation that's set up there, and testimony in courts and everything like that. Like, you take a look at the whole OJ thing, when they basically said look,
the glove is
here,
not
no,
fit.
there was that, but for instance, here they're showing that, here he was showing up at a party, and he's, or wherever he was, and he's smiling and laughing, and then what, half an hour before that he was killing his wife, and the thing is, they're presenting that as
a fact.
As a fact, and look at OJ, he's a nice guy, and then there he's half an hour. How can you think of it? And yet, statistically, anybody who's an expert who's dealing with psychopaths would say absolutely that's completely consistent behavior for any psychopath, and yet at the same time, because you've got a jury of the peers, again specifically chosen by the two sides, bombarded
based on their experience, who is vulnerable toward what fact or what reality.
And the other thing then too is bombarded by information and inference and misdirection by lawyers on both sides, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's such a complete imbalance in terms of the level
presenting the truth from the lies.
Exactly, and their ability to discern it. It's just, beyond the pale. So finally, in the end, it becomes really a way of maintaining the status quo, because you can basically engineer who's going to win, and at the same time make it officially appear as if he was justice
is
was
done
served by the
based on-
peers.
By
Right?
the peers, based on the truth and facts.
I mean, that's the ultimate game of the game.
in
Is give
fact-
them the misdirection of
in
justice
fact,
while
I-
doing the opposite.
In
Perfect.
fact, I was reading somewhere, I don't know where was it, I just go through the different articles online. It's not like old days, you get a book so you remember the name of the book. It was mentioned when you go and when they say the oath of the court, it says, I swear to tell the truth, nothing
whole
but
truth
the whole truth,
and
but
nothing
nothing
but
the
the
truth.
truth, yeah.
So the person who wrote this said, say, okay, all these three items, that means there is always three versions of the same story. I tell the truth, the whole truth, because you were talking about this table. You said we can say everything else except you mentioned that. The whole truth, but nothing the truth. So you can have three versions of the same story based on that. Again, I read it. I don't know how much it was being facetious or it's just there is
No, well, okay.
some truth to that.
No. But what they're saying is the truth, the whole truth. In other words, there's no omission. There's no lying by. First of all, the truth. There's no lying by commission.
Yes.
The whole truth means no lying by omission. And nothing but the truth means then that also this inference and this editorializing. So let's take a look at the news, right?
Yeah.
What do we have? Basically, we have an event that takes up maybe 5 minutes, 10 minutes that they can actually talk about it. I mean, let's just take a look at, for instance, the idea of we're going to have. I mean, let's just say it ends up becoming Trump versus Clinton. Okay.
Okay.
Let's just say that they're chosen. Then what we're going to have is them for whatever, 6 months or however many period of time, they're going to be the two. We know everything about each of them. There's no news that we know about their policies, we know how they feel about each other, etc. At the same time, there's going to be very, very few facts that are going to be presented or actually taking place in this phase that are meaningful in the next 6 months. But in the meantime, you've got basically news channels that have to actually talk about this for, let's just say, at least 2-3 hours a day, right? So now what they have to then do
You're very generous.
is they,
You're 24 hours 7.
basically, if there's nothing else, they'll talk about this. But the thing about it is they have to come up with something to say, right? So now they're going to actually embellish and everything.
Bring the experts.
So now what's happening is you're getting almost everything but the truth is exactly what you're presented, as it's just dumped on you. So finally, in the midst, in all this huge soup that is landing, you have a hard time remembering what the actual truth was. That's basically then what
and not to mention the pics and pieces that being taken out of the context and just flash it all over.
All of that. So finally, you're bombarded so completely that that it's almost impossible for anyone to even really remember what the truth originally was.
So our justice system is not necessarily rely on the real truthfulness, and probably more lean toward the lies or the contriving the part of the truth or reality for that matter.
Well, and finally, if it goes on long enough, you have no reality. You've got so much editorializing going on that really there is nobody out there who. I mean, there might be somebody who actually still remembers the truth, but it's insignificant because the vast majority really only have the perception of the truth. So the truth becomes the perception of the truth, and the perception of the truth is changing moment by moment, and therefore the truth is changing moment by moment, and so essentially you're in virtual reality.
So it is kind of a dynamic lying or dynamic truthfulness, either way, the way you look at it. And when it goes to the companies, a smaller scale, we let's say bring the whole thing to a company that has 20, 30 people, and this lies plays along. How people can deal with that or do deal with that, but they just buy, they just accept it and don't say anything. That is why they are they can work happily together.
I think what ends up happening is, once again, you get this mutual admiration society going on. You get essentially a day-to-day habits going on, until finally what happens is that each is sort of in their own kind of bubble truth. Mm-hmm. The bubbles themselves have some kind of relation to one another, which is sort of tenuous. It's not necessarily logical. and it just bumbles along. You know, like marbles bumping into each other and just sort of going down a slope. Just bumping, going down this slope, and they just sort of end there somewhere. The problem is, because they're so unconscious of the process, it'd be very difficult for them even to change a process that they're not even conscious of.
Because they're so deep involved themselves.
As well.
Chris, 2 minutes. We have 3 minutes.
Yeah.
Let me. So we are close to the end of the program. Having said that, now I want to just ask you a quick question before we end the program, because all of this is a dandy, that we understand that people are a creature of habits, and part of their habit is lying, and or they want to sugarcoat it as a mutual admiration society. Then why they enjoy gossiping then? They lie, they accept the lies they receive, but yet they enjoy immensely to gossip about it.
I think also it's killing time. You look at Facebook.
So really, we human beings don't know what to do with their lives. We're living too long.
I think what we experience is tension. And, you know, either that tension is directed towards, you know, there's a certain dynamic tension that we're born with that makes us move, that makes us act, right, as a being, right, which is actually healthy probably. And I think that, you know, it can be creatively dispelled in terms of actually productive work or creativity. But if it's not creatively dispelled, which takes effort, which takes, you know, sort of alignment, which takes discipline, right, then the path of least resistance is to dispel that energy in very unproductive ways, and gossip would be one of them.
The reason I said that, because you said about the reason I brought the issue of the gossip, because when you are talking about mutual admiration society kind of the environment, that not only here in Toronto, everywhere in the world, we are under the under the subtext of the customs and the traditions. I remember when I was very young, I used to go, let's say, to visit our uncle, aunt, or some guest.
Yeah.
And my parents, I was very young, maybe 7, 8 years, 9 years old. I was going in. We go to the party. They had good time. We are kids. We are playing with the kids. Finish. Goodbye, everybody, kissing each other, getting to the car, and then my mother and father start to talk about them.
Typical.
Now, I thought maybe my father and father is the exception at that time. Didn't have much. But when I grew up, I saw in every family.
This going on.
Everyone that I met. We go to even as adult, when I was younger, I used to have friends. So when we go somewhere, everything is fine. We had all of the fun, we had all of the drinking, and we had all of the laughter and the shoulder crying if there was any. And then when we leave, then the criticism started.
Yeah,
and so
true.
it's not just work environment. I have seen it with the families.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's with the families, and I mean I'm thinking about my own. Yeah, it's and the funny thing is that it takes up so much of your life that I found myself that when I, you know, ceased to have much connection with my family, there was this huge hole of energy and time.
Spend on that.
Which was devoted to that, and that how much time that takes up. And I think this is also what keeps everything in place, because this way nobody can actually get on with doing anything productive.
It's like that gang mentality we talk about. Everybody is guilty of something.
Oh yeah. And that's what keeps them together.
Okay. Folks, that was our program for this Tuesday, 22nd of the March 2016. Please tune in next week, same place, same time. Thank you and good night.
Got my city, got my sin, got my baby, I'm rolling in. Well, she's gone on high. I know she's lost, she's gonna die. Used to give me supper in a $5 bill, sitting with the birds on the windowsill. I wish I could fly away, trying to find sail on high. Oh, where you been now before I die? On the